Welcome back, trainers. You're with PewterCityJim, and today we're carrying on with our journey through Jasper. In the last two episodes, we discovered this area based on the real-life locale of California City, a kind of small town that's somehow this state's third largest city by land area. I took a short vacation there to help me come up with creatures for Sola's desert wild area, which I've named Jasper. It's a wildlife area similar to a safari zone run by this man, Professor Linden. In the prior videos, we met a few starter-coded Pokemon that will join you on your way out into the desert. In the last episode, they evolved too, but they aren't the only critters out here, not by a long shot. So let's continue, but first, hey! On this channel, we do a bunch of Let's Play stuff. Right now, it's an art lock through the Alola region with Pokemon Sun version. We also just started playing through Pokemon Emerald Seaglass for Fangame Friday, our little way of celebrating the oncoming weekend. Other than that, we do a bunch of Fakemon-centric art, from our own Fakemon region Sola to various contest entries and prompt challenges. If any of that sounds like fun to you, awesome. It would be amazing if you could do all the usual YouTube stuff. Smash that like button, sub to the channel if you're not already, and if you want to say hi down in the comments, that would be amazing. I do my best to respond to everyone. Remember, trainer, you are welcome here. So, as mentioned already, we have a fair few pages in our Jasper Pokédex filled in. Jasper is a town in a wild area in the northeast of Sola's map. It's kind of off-grid when you get there, so you're filling in pages in an old-school field manual for now, but that will change later. For the minute, it's not super important though. This video is going to be centered mostly on evolving some of these prior entries. We're going to start with Bleckleberry, and for one very important reason. I set up a poll asking which of these two odd little grass types you'd like on your team. Gura took the lead early, and it remained there for a bit as I was setting up the script and editing for the prior video, but while I wasn't paying any attention, our little yellow fellow here took the lead and has thus far retained it. Bleckleberry enjoyers, you were robbed, and I'm here to make amends. Just as a reminder, Bleckleberry is based on the horse nettleberry. This bright little morsel was tempting when I first discovered it out in the wilderness, but it's highly toxic. Please don't eat them. It's a member of the nightshade family, which does include tomatoes and potatoes and peppers, so you could honestly be forgiven for thinking that it looks like a tasty little treat, but in reality, it's quite deadly. My goal for this design was to create a little creature that looks like it's turning its weakness into a strength. Bleckleberry constantly feels like it's on the verge of yarking because its own body can't handle the weird mix of toxins that it contains. Its cheeks puff out and it's drooling, and it just looks obviously miserable. This evolved form is a bit taller and more defined, with a separate head and body section. Kind of a bound sweet to Steenie situation where it's becoming a bit more humanoid. It has those big, bulbous cheeks, but it's realized that it can use them to squirt poison more accurately than just belching it up all over the place. It still looks a bit upset at this, and it still drools, but it's getting a little better at being the poison type it was always meant to be. The dried up leaves on its head are replaced with a blossom that looks like the horse nettle flower, which is basically the same as a tomato blossom or the flowers on a potato plant. They come in varying shades of purple, white, and yellow, but I went for a purple to complement the berry's yellow skin. And here we have Fruitin' Tootin', the accurate Pokemon. Fruitin' Tootin' roam the desert, spitting up poisons they soak out of the ground with the micro roots on the soles of their feet. Their body can only store so much toxic material, and they need to release it every so often. Rocks with acid burns on them are evidence of this Pokemon doing target practice with these noxious liquids. It retains that grass and poison typing, and the ability is the same as its prior form. It's a custom ability that I explained in our first Jasper video, so go take a look at that if you're interested to know more. It hasn't gained much height over its prior form, but it is a little lighter. The name's a bit weird, right? One term I've heard used to describe stuff in the Wild West is rootin' tootin'. It's used to describe something or someone that's enthusiastic and lively. Well, this Pokemon's definitely starting to gain a bit more enthusiasm for life compared to the prior form. This might kinda give away the final evolution as well, but we will see. Here are your stats and moves. A bit of an increase overall, but especially in the speed category. A few new moves, but nothing to really write home about yet. Anyway, for those of you who voted for Bleckleberry in the poll, I hope that this evolution was worth the wait, and I can't wait to share the final form with you. So, our next evolution is Graven. This birdie buddy is inspired by the sheer number of crows that I heard and saw in California City. Their calls were like the soundtrack to my vacation there. They could be heard pretty much everywhere. This is a two-stage line, sort of like Spearow or Tailo. In this form, it has embraced its undead nature a little more, with the bones lining up less like a skeleton and more like objects that are just kind of hovering in some purple ectoplasm. Speaking of bones, its head no longer hosts any feathers, and you have a gleaming yellow skull in its place. Those eyes have gone from wide and blue to cavernous, perfectly dark pits with blue illuminated pupils. The wings are still roughly feathered appendages though, and it's got a bit of a hunch to its back that I borrowed from your stereotypical vulture or buzzard shape. This carrion bird dines on peck-sized portions of your soul rather than making an ill-fated attempt to dine on physical creatures. In fact, it primarily hunts other ghost Pokemon, but with a special preference for Duskull. And here we have Cor Wraith, the Soul Feast Pokemon. Claw Wraith are most active at dawn and dusk, where they hunt ghost-type Pokemon who are either looking for shade to hide in or are emerging to fly free at night. They will also circle in the air above Pokemon or humans who they believe are close to death. Fresh souls apparently taste better than old ones. Ooh, a little morbid, but hey, nature isn't always pretty or kind. It's still a flying and ghost type with the same abilities as before. It's grown considerably in size as well. The name is pretty self-explanatory, it's just a mix of Caw and Wraith. Stats and moves. It's gained some serious power between forms and picked up some killer moves too. It's not the most powerful Pokemon around, but it should be pretty fun to use. Let's move on to the next bird. This little big fella is based on two things: tumbleweeds and roadrunners. I saw so many tumbleweeds in California City just sprinting around the desert, but another thing I noticed was that when they came up against an obstacle, they would kind of all bunch together, especially in corners. You'd wind up with these big, huge piles of them. That gave me an idea for an evolution method. I've always kind of wished that multi-body Pokemon required multiple of the same Pokemon to evolve. Like, make it make sense to me that our little friend Diglett is just spontaneously erupting two new friends to become Dugtrio. 3 Magnemite fused together to become 1 Magneton, but where did your fellow Magmites come from, little fella? Where were they up until now? I know it would make some Pokemon ridiculously hard to get, I'm looking at you, Metagross, but it would also add some additional flair to these monsters that are just multiplied. Anyway, if you can catch a whole party of Rumbleweed and get one of them up to level 35, you would get this next critter. Some of the piles of tumbleweeds I found in California City had to be 8 or 9 feet tall, and as such, this bird is going to be huge and imposing. No longer rolling around at the whim of the wind, this one finds a corner and basks. I imagine it being a good parent and incubating a big clutch of eggs underneath its body, soaking in sunlight and transferring that heat down into the brood. Misty made a suggestion, and I took it because there's a little gender-based dimorphism with Roadrunners, and Sola has very few Pokemon who differ based on gendered appearance. It seemed like an opportunity to do a bit of that, so you have some additional barring on the back of the males along with heavier eyebrows. The green flourishes, by the way, on Rumbleweed and its evolution are because, despite almost always being pretty brown when they're running around, they're quite a pretty shade of green when they're still growing. Anyway, here we have Stumbleweed, the stay-put Pokemon. Stumbleweed find any kind of walking very difficult, as each head wants to go somewhere different. They will instead find an easily defensible sunny place and settle there. Their days of sprinting around long behind them, they instead devote their lives to raising young Rumbleweed. Abilities remain the same as to types. You will notice, however, that it is pretty massive. Here are your stats and moves. That speed stat drops a little bit, but defenses go up to compensate. The moves list makes this thing a relatively formidable opponent, so raise yours with care. Alright, finally, let's take a look at those starters, shall we? I did a poll after Jasper's first episode dropped and asked you trainers which of the 3 you might choose. Upperpup knocked out the victory pretty handily. Torble came in at number 2 and Cuticle slipped in at number 3. Honestly, it was about what I was expecting. Then came episode 2 and another poll. You went and flipped the script on me with Torble's evolution beating the other two like they were sleepy hares in a children's fable. Slow and Steady won the race by a country mile. So, let's start off with Tortoiseshell's final stage. I wanted this Pokemon to remain a quadruped for a couple of reasons. Firstly, people just generally seem to prefer that. Secondly, I didn't want this just to be a rock-type Blastoise. It does have some Torterra vibes, I guess, but with Torterra's Ankylosaur features, I kinda think they're distinct enough from one another. Those spikes from Tortoiseshell became massive horns on this final form. A bit reminiscent of a water buffalo or something like that. It retains that goofy grin and slightly vacantite stare though. Just a big, clumsy herbivore launching itself around on those flat feet. Color palette remains the same as well. I hope all you folks who voted for this line in either poll are happy with the end result. And here we have Ferropin, the foothill Pokemon. Ferropin contains slightly less iron in its shell than would qualify it as a steel type, but oxidized iron is where it gets its coloration from, and this is referenced in the name. It eats only a few times a year, but will engage in fierce headbutting contest over the tenderest leaves. So as pointed out in the dex, the name contains reference to iron. Jasper's primarily rusty red color as a mineral comes from oxidized iron in the rock, which is common to many red minerals actually. Terrapin is the name for the whole group of tortoises and turtles, so Ferropin. It's still a pure rock type and the abilities remain constant. It's pretty big though, and that weight gives Dialga a run for its money. Maybe if it ate a little more often than once or twice a year, it could be a contender. Anyway, stats and moves. A bit of buffing to all of its stats, but especially those defenses, and you get a few more interesting moves added to the arsenal. Alright, and now let's take a look at what Cuticle finally becomes. You know, I actually really like this line. I was pretty happy to see that it essentially pulled even with Puppercut in the last poll. The concept for this entire line is that of an airborne scout. The expressions on the prior 2 forms have it with a sort of nonplussed look to its face, looking downward with head tilted up. I was trying to give it an I'm above it all sort of a look. A little snooty, I guess. Anyway, this final stage looks a lot friendlier. A bit more integrated with the world below. That aloof exterior from the prior forms has melted away a bit as it was all an act, and now it's a little more expressive in regards to the bonds it's formed. I wanted to give it feathers that resemble a scarf to guard against low temperatures at high altitudes. It also has even better developed foot armor, including a claw that's meant to symbolize both a wing and a spur like you'd see on old cowboy boots. A little Old West desert influence for this high-flying scout. It does do a lot of kicking, so it made sense to me. And here we have Criticoot, the intel Pokemon. Criticoot soars through the sky looking for danger, food, potential habitats, and anything else interesting enough to warrant its flock's attention. If you are its trainer, then it considers you and its fellow team members that flock. There's no distance too great for Criticoot to fly if it means helping those it holds dear. Still a pure flying type with unchanged abilities. It definitely got taller though. The name Criticoot has a couple things going for it. Being the intel Pokemon, the idea that it's gathering critical information plus the old critical hit. I mean, we all want to land a crit every so often, right? Stats and moves. A significant buff in most important areas with a few new moves added. This Pokemon's definitely on par with its Jasper starter peers, so I do hope that those of you who picked it in either poll are happy that you did. Alright, let's take a look at our scrappy little underdog. Ousted from the top spot, can it pull out a come-from-behind victory with this new design? Or will its desire to be number 1 end with a 10 count? So I redesigned this poor pup several times, all the way to getting a finished design done, waking up the next day and deciding, wow, I hate this, and starting over. I have that finished art and speed paint available still. If you want to see it, put a dog emoji down in the comments for me. If I get more than, let's say 5, I'll make it into a short. Anyway, this design needed a new attitude. Upper Pup was stoic. Puppercut was angry, and this Pokemon needed to exude a level of confidence. All the trials of desert life have raised this critter into an unstoppable fighting machine, and it's happy to let loose and show off those skills. It's got that classic crouching dog playful pose, and the glove on its tail is a little unclenched, like it's ready to throw a series of quick jabs. And here we have Coyote, the challenger Pokemon. Coyote tend to roam the desert in small packs or go it solo. They're always moving from one place to the next, and as such have massive appetites. They will always be up to spar with other fighting-type Pokemon. If you want to train Coyote, you'll need to provide adequate food and activity to keep them happy. Still a pure fighting type of course, and it got a fair bit bigger too. It's cultivating mass so it can hit harder, I guess. Abilities remain constant. The name, K-O, as in, knockout, and Coyote. Pretty simple. Here are your stats and moves. It's definitely got better defenses, but it's still kind of a glass cannon. We do see a few more tricky moves integrated into the set so that it can last a little longer in battle. Alright, well, as with all starter trios, these guys have a theme. And I do have to wonder if anyone picked up on it. These Pokemon have the theme of survival. The Mojave is a rough place to live, and so finding successful strategies to make it day to day, well, that's important. The Upper Pup line is about fighting for survival, competing and winning what you need, and protecting the things that are close to you. Cuticle is about learning as much as you can about where you are, surveying for resources, analyzing danger from on high, staying on your toes, and being able to make a quick getaway if needed. The Torable line? Well, sometimes the best strategy is just to hunker down and wait till danger just passes you by. Disguise yourself to go unnoticed, or just build up your defenses to the point that staying in one spot is a viable option. Alright gang, well that's the current crop of Jasper Pokemon. We still have a fair few more to go, several evolutions, and some fresh faces to be revealed next time. I hope to catch you then, but in the meantime, take care trainers. Bye!